Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. I'm James, continuing on with my Balsa USA Stingray 120 build. In this video, I'm going to be installing the servos for the tail section, which is going to be the rudder and the elevator. So laid out in front of me here is all the hardware plus the servos I'm going to be using, which are these. These are HiTec HS-645MG Ultra Torque servos. This is a analog servo, and I'll pop the box open in just a few minutes to show you what we have in there. But before I do that, I want to go over the hardware that I'm going to be using. To start with, I have the control rods that are supplied in the kit. I think these are 440 size. And as you can see, they're threaded on one end. And this takes the threaded clevis, which is these kind of gold or these brass colored ones. And then on the other end, it's blank or solid, because these are going to be cut to the proper length. And once I get everything set up, I'll cut these to the proper length. And then we're going to solder on the clevis on this side. So this is what the silver clevises are used for soldering. So those are going to go on like this. The Balsa USA kit comes with these control horns, and you know, these are kind of your typical plastic control horn. There's nothing fancy about them. They kind of, to me, they kind of look like they're a little bit on the small side, but I guess they would work okay. But I decided to go ahead and try something else. So I'm going to use these heavy-duty adjustable control horns from Servo. There's actually two control horns in here, and there's a bunch of little hardware that goes with them. It looks like it's kind of complicated to use these, but actually I think it's actually easier to use. You just have to drill one hole. So we'll pop this open when we get to that step. The other thing I have are some extensions for the servos. So as mentioned, I have two servos that are installed in the back of the plane in the tail section for the elevator and the rudder. And then of course I have the servos in the wings for the ailerons. So all of those are going to need to have extension wires on them in order to get to the receiver in the center of the fuselage. And then to secure the connection from the extension wire to the servo itself, I'm just going to be using heat shrink tubing. And then just a side note, if you ever want to kind of color code your connections for your servos, like for example, if you have ailerons in the wings, you'll have a right and a left aileron, and you need to hook those up to the right wires that are in your fuselage coming off your receiver. I find it helpful to use heat shrink tubing. I cut a little piece like this. For example, here's a yellow one that I had, and I just put it on there. Obviously I shrink it down, and I use the same color for the corresponding lead coming off of the receiver. I find that to be a pretty helpful way to make sure everything's connected correctly. So as mentioned, I'm going to be doing some soldering again. The last time I did soldering was for the wire braces for the tail section. That was a few videos back. You can check that out. I'm not an expert at soldering, so kind of bear with me as I do that. But I'm going to use the same method as I did in that video. I'm going to be using this Weller soldering iron. It's kind of a small soldering iron. And I'm also going to be using this Harris solder, which this is metal work. This is for metal, not for electronics. This is for metal. And then also this Harris water-soluble flux. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to clear off my work area here, and I'm going to open up all the servos. I'm going to take them out and I'm going to get them set up. I'm going to put on all the little rubber grommets. So let's take a look at our Dubro heavy duty adjustable control horn set. Let's pop it out of the package. I'm going to give you a nice little instruction card here. Pull the staple out of here. Now let's look at our parts. Seems like a lot of parts for a control horn, but I don't think it's going to be that bad. So I had to give you a long screw. There's a set of 2 in here, so they give you a set of long screws. They give you 2 kind of heavy duty clevises. These are probably 440. I'm not sure what size those are, but they're probably 440. And then they give you these 2 little, they look like little control arms that are going to attach onto the ends of the screws there, or bolts, whatever you want to call them. Then it has these little cone-shaped risers or arms that come off of the control surface. Then you have a bunch of these little guys here. These look like washers. They're flat on one side, and they have this sort of rounded or convex shape on the other side. You can see there. And then sort of kind of matching that, there's another little set where it's flat on one side, and then it's got this concave side, and then a couple just standard nuts. So the way these work is they're kind of cool. Is if you look at the instructions here, if you can see that the reason these are rounded like this or have those convex and concave sides to them is because if you have an angled sort of control surface like this, as shown in the instructions, what will happen is what you have to do is you have to drill the screw so it's perpendicular with the axis of the control surface here, obviously. And when you do that, you'll see that there's going to be an angle between the screw and then the control surface itself. So the way they remedy that is they put these little convex and concave parts on these little washers here so that they'll kind of just fit over that control surface and just rotate into the right position. So the way it works, we'll kind of set one up here, is you start with the screw. So we're going to drill a hole. So if the control surface is just flat, it's not tapered, then there's no really issue with it. You just drill your screw in perpendicular and it'll just sit right on top of it. But again, if it's angled like this, these little guys will sort of compensate for that. So what we're going to do is we're going to drill that hole through, and then grab one of the screws, and you're going to grab this little smaller, I guess, bushing or something, I don't know what to call it, and you put the flat side down up against the head of the screw like that, and then you have that concave side like it is there, oriented like that. And you're going to drop down one of these washers, and that'll just kind of fit in there. And you can see now, you can kind of see how this thing can kind of rotate around. It can orient itself correctly. And then that'll go into the control surface. And then on the other side of the control surface, you'll drop this guy down on top of there, like that. And then you're going to thread on this all these little parts. I have no idea what to call them, what the names of them would be. This little cone-shaped dude. This is going to go all the way down, and then you can see how that if you had that tapered surface, they would just basically kind of do something like that. Really cool. Okay, and then on top of this goes to there, and then there's going to be like this sort of lock. These nuts are going to be used to sort of lock it down. Okay, I'm not going to do it all the way down. I guess I'll go something like that. And then you're going to screw on this sort of control arm. It's threaded on the inside, so we're just going to screw that on. I'm not going to take it all the way down. It'll take me forever, but you get the picture. And then what will happen now is that's why it's adjustable. That's why it says it's adjustable, because once this is all locked on to the control surface, you can just move this up and down depending on how long you want it. And really, I don't think it needs to go much longer than, I'm gonna take mine all the way down to the bottom here. I don't need to have it way up here like this. It's not gonna be needed like that. So you'll take this down, and then if you're gonna be using the clevises that they supply, they'll just snap right into here and then screw on to your control rod. So, but for me, because I'm going to be using the ones that come with the Balsa USA kit, I'll just be snapping those in like that. So that's how those work. So let's go ahead and get the tail section servos in. So if you remember, if you've been following along with this build, you may recall that when I constructed these servo mounting bays, I put a string in here so that I can tie it on to the wire coming off the servo and then pull it through the fuselage. Otherwise, it'd been pretty hard to sort of fish that out if I didn't do that. So let me go ahead and grab one of these. There it is. So I'll just tie that onto the servo wire. But first, so I have my extension here, and I will plug it into the servo like so. And now I'm going to get my heat shrink and put it around here. Right now we'll just go ahead and tie it onto here, or tape it, one of the two. And now I'll just go ahead and pull it through. Go. All right, so these two control horns are now installed. I like the way they look. They're very strong, and it was very easy to put these on. I was really happy with how they turned out. You may have noticed when I was cutting off the bolt, I took my time. I didn't want the bolt to get too hot and possibly damage this little control arm, which is made out of plastic. Okay, so the next step, I'm going to go ahead and put the control arms on the servos here, and then we'll get the control rods set up. Now that the servos and the control horns are installed, I can now connect them with the control rod. So one thing I need to point out is, first of all, when you have your control surface moving, it's most efficient and to prevent binding and such to have the control horn sort of perpendicular with the axis of the hinge line, as you see here. You don't want it over here, you don't want it over here. Sometimes you do have to put it on an angle depending on the situation. I've done that plenty of times, and it does work, but sometimes it can bind, and it's not the most sort of efficient way for this to work. So hopefully what you can do is get the control horn, like I said, perpendicular like this. Now in this situation, I have the servos back here, of course, mounted in the tail section. Now if the tail section, if the servos were mounted up in the front of the fuselage, I would have a long control rod come through, and I could probably flex it enough to have it work out okay. But because they're so close, I have a little bit of an issue with the alignment. So for example, if I just try to line up this control horn with this control rod, sort of like this, you'll see that I miss the servo arm right here, right? And then also, because this is tapered, the direction or the movement of the servo from coming off the servo is parallel with the side of the fuselage, and that takes it in this direction. So I have a little bit of a problem, which is easy to fix, but I just want to show you here. So I have a little bit of an issue that these two guys are not going to be in alignment with each other. So the best way to deal with that is to put some type of a bend in the control rod. So what I'm going to do is I'm basically going to put like a dog leg in this. So it's going to be straight like this, and then I'm just going to kind of bend it out and then bend it back in so that it meets and hits this at this angle that I want. So it's basically going to be a little bit funky looking. It's going to be going this direction. It's going to bend out this way and then go meet the control horn right here, and it's going to look, like I said, like a dog leg. Now I know some people have commented, oh, never put a bend in a control rod or something like that. I don't think that's a problem. These are very stiff. These are steel, I think, rods. They're very stiff, and if you have a little bend in it and such, it's not going to be a big issue. If you had like a thin control rod and it was bending a lot, then maybe you'd have a little bit of a, I guess, when it bends like that, you could have it sort of doing something like this as it's being pushed back and forth. But I don't think that's going to be the case here. This is relatively close, and again, this is a very strong steel control rod, and I don't think you're going to get any flexing in it. And really, it's the only way I can do it. So if it's not perfect, it's just not perfect, but I think it's going to work fine, and it's going to minimize any kind of binding between the servo and the control horn. And as I mentioned before, these came with the kit, and these are going to require soldering on one of the clevises, which I think is the silver one, and that's going to go on the side that doesn't have the threads on it. It's going to go back here on this one. This will be soldered on here. And then of course I have the one here that's threads onto the rod here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take it in, give myself some room to play with just in case, and I can always cut more off if I need to. But I'm going to take it out, somewhere around there. That way if I have to make an adjustment after I because once I cut this and solder it, I can't move this guy. So I need to give myself a little bit of leeway back on this one. So I'll just kind of have it like that, and that long as the inner the threads of the rod itself, or basically the end of the rod, doesn't hit the control horn here coming off the servo, then I'll be okay. But yeah, I like to give myself a little bit of room like that so I can kind of make adjustments. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to kind of get this guy on here where it needs to be, and basically just sort of look and see. I'm just going to eyeball it and just figure out the best way to get it to kind of come over, make this dog leg and attach into here. Then I'll cut the proper length of it, and then once I cut the length of it, we'll go ahead and solder on the clevis, and I'm going to do that for both the elevator and the rudder. Alright, so I'm just going to go ahead and pick somewhere in the middle of the control rod here, somewhere right around here to make my first bend, and I'm just going to have to eyeball it. So I'm going to bend it out this way, and then I'm going to bend it that way. This is some really strong wire here. Okay, that's all I got to do. So that's like that. And now I just got to bring it over to that spot over there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to have to sort of eyeball it and guess a little bit and hope I get it right. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this guy like this other one I have, like this. Again, it's not perfect, but it's going to help out a lot to have these bends like this. So right about there. So now I'm going to go ahead and bend that now toward the control horn. Nice thing about it being wire and metal is that it's a little forgiving and we can go back to it and make adjustments. Okay, so it looks like I'm off by just a tad there. So again, I want this to be parallel with this here. It comes out and looks like I miss it, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and bend this one a little bit out more, and it'll bend that one in a little bit. How's that look? I think that's close. I'm going to give it one more little tweak. Right about there. Now we'll just go ahead and connect our clevis, give it a little bit of a test drive here. Well, now you can see I kind of made a mistake. I should have connected this on here in the beginning instead of relying on it just kind of setting on there. But that's okay. I can just go ahead and I'll bend this one again, and then I'll bend it out toward there again. All right, there we go. I think that's going to work just like that. And now we'll mark the location of the clevis that I'm going to solder on. So I'm carefully going to just take it to where the control horn is, and I'm just going to eyeball it right about, kind of shaky. Now I have a little bit of room, so I'm going to go ahead and somewhere right about there. Oops. Pen's not working very good. There it goes. So that's where I'll make the cut for the clevis. It'll be right there. All right, so one thing I need to make sure is that I orient the clevis correctly when I solder it. So because I have that mark on there, and also because I have this bend in here, I know that that's going to be sort of horizontal, if you will. So I'll just line this up like this when I solder it to make sure that it's correct. Let's pull this off, and then we can go ahead and solder it up. All right, so we'll give this a cut here. Like I said, this is really strong stuff, so I'm going to have to kind of work with it a little bit. Whoa, there it goes. Now I'll get the burrs off the end. This will go in there, obviously, and this will go back over here. Okay, so let's get soldering. So once again, I'm not an expert at soldering, so I'll do my best here. So I'm going to be using this Weller soldering iron. It's a small one, as you can see here. And then I'm going to be using, as I mentioned before, solder for metal work. I guess this is from, what is this? Like once Harris again, and also their soldering flux again from Harris. And then, you know, some people that I've looked at online and such, they actually use a little micro torch like this. This is a nice one. I got this from Harbor Freight. Oops. Works really nice. I have a problem with this because it gets too hot for me. And I think what happens is I get it way too hot, and then all of a sudden my solder just kind of bubbles up and kind of beads up, and it doesn't do much. So I need to practice more with using a little hand torch like this. So I have a clamp, kind of a desktop vise here to hold the clevis in place. And then what I need to do is I need to prep this. So what we're going to do is we're going to get some sandpaper and just sand it, kind of clean it off nicely with some sandpaper, get a nice fresh bright metal surface here. Get that nice and clean. And then I have some alcohol here. We're just going to clean it off with some alcohol. Look how nice and clean that is. We're going to do the same thing for the clevis. Going to drop it in there. Let it swish around a little bit. All right, let this dry for a minute. Now that the alcohol is evaporated, we'll go ahead and put our flux on this. I'm just going to stick the end in the tube here. Get plenty of that on there. We'll put some, work some into the clevis. Now what I want to do, as I mentioned, I want to make sure I've oriented this correctly. So we'll just put this flat like that. Okay, that's correct like that now. I want that to move on us. Let me go ahead and get the vise. Got this vise from Harbor Freight. Harbor Freight is great for little things, for hobbies. All right, so the way I got this oriented is I have it dipping down toward the vise here, because I want to do is I want to heat this clevis area up and get it hot enough, and then I want the solder to sort of run down into it. So let's turn this on and let it get going here. Okay, so my goal here is get the metal hot. You want to get the metal hot, not the solder. You get the metal hot, you touch the solder to the hot metal, and hopefully it'll flow once it gets going here. So let's be very careful. I'm going to try the blowtorch. Well, I guess the blowtorch worked a lot better than this thing. I think maybe that tip was just too small and it's not really transferring the heat very well. Okay, so we're going to let this cool and then come back to it and clean it off and see how it worked. And then one thing I wanted to note about soldering is you want it to just cool off on its own. You don't want to dip it in water or blow on it. You don't want it to crack or anything like that. You just want it to let it cool off, let it cool off down to room temperature, and then handle it. Okay, this one cooled off, so let's go ahead and pull it out of here. All right. And I'll clean it off with some alcohol. So it looks like using the little blowtorch actually worked better for me this time. It seemed like it was tougher for me before, but it worked out, so I'll try it again. So there we go. And then what's nice about it is you can tell perhaps, but that solder just kind of seeped down along that seam, and it also filled in on the inside here. So that's going to be nice and strong. All right, so I'll set this one aside. Now what I did while that one was cooling, I actually went and I did the other control rod, and it actually doesn't have as big as bend in it as the other one did. So that's nice. Let me go ahead and, I did a little bit of sanding on it, but let me go ahead and finish getting this cleaned up here. Then we'll solder this one on. there. And I'll grab my other clevis, throw that in there. Let this get kind of cleaned up. The reason I use tweezers a lot, here I just did it because I wanted to pull it out of the alcohol without putting my finger on it, but I'll use tweezers a lot for some of this just because it's easier for the camera view. You know, instead of having my big fingers in the way, I like to use tweezers to make it easier for you guys to see what I'm doing. Right, we'll let this evaporate, dry up here, and then we'll come back and solder that one on. Get my flux on there. And this one's going to orient like this. Alright, so again I had to orient it upward again. I forgot about that. So let's go ahead and try the blowtorch again. It seemed like it worked okay. Okay, so let that cool off, like I mentioned, and then we'll take it off and we'll put both these back on the plane. Okay, so this is nice and cool. Let's pull it off of here. And then just taking a look at it, I see I got a nice coverage of the solder in there. Full coverage through the clevis. Very good. Okay, so let's go ahead and start with the elevator control rod. I'll go ahead and put on the clevis on the threaded side here. Somewhere around there. And I'll go ahead and attach it. I guess I'll try to, maybe I'll just go ahead and attach it to the control horn first. There's that guy. Get a straight edge like this and just put it like that, and it's a good way to keep everything nice and straight. Just approximate. Go right about there. Okay. Now I know a lot of times you put those little, cut a piece of tubing, fuel tubing, and you put it over these clevises. Helps retain it, helps keep it from coming open. Well, honestly, the sort of the nylon plastic ones, in my opinion, it's good for those. But these metal ones, these ones are by Debro. These are super strong. I don't know. I honestly don't think that if this thing got pulled off of here for some reason, that little little fuel tubing piece, I don't think would do much for it, because this is really strong. If this thing broke off for some reason, you have a bigger problem. You're probably crashing. Okay, let's go ahead and get this one threaded on. If you ever wonder how long it takes to make these videos, several hours. For like a 30-minute video or 20-minute video, I'm probably doing somewhere around 2 hours of actual video recording, and then the actual step takes me several days. For example, if you noticed, I just flipped the plane over. We were looking at this side for the elevator. The plane was oriented in another direction. It was on the other side of the table. I had to flip it all around. I had to move all my junk around to get it over here. It took me about 5 minutes. You know, not a lot of time, but it took that much time just to flip it over here. So if you're ever wondering, like, how come I haven't seen a video in a while, or how come this video is this or that, because it takes a lot actually to do this. I didn't realize how much work it is to do these videos, and they're not that great. These aren't some kind of great production things either. So anyhow, just thought I'd let you know. Okay, so this guy is going to go onto here like so, And then he's going to go right back here. So let me go ahead and hook him up onto the rudder first. Find my... Then when I move everything around to make a move, I forget where I put all my stuff. Okay. Yeah, these things are very strong, these Dobro clevises. Okay, like that. Now, once again, I will line up my control surface to make sure it's relatively parallel with everything, although this one's going to be a little bit more difficult because it's the rudder and this is tapered, so I'm just going to have to kind of eyeball it, and I'll have to make adjustments later. But I'm going to go right about, it's probably okay like that actually. So let me pop this guy on this side. There it goes. Boom. And I see how the rudder goes. Okay, that's nice. All right, let's go ahead and give her a test run here. Elevator, rudder. Well, I hope you're as excited as I am. I'm really happy to be finished with this step. I always find it tricky getting everything lined up like this and getting everything attached with the control surfaces. So the next step in this build is going to be to do the same thing for the ailerons, and that'll be in the next video. Well, like always, thank you for watching my channel. I really appreciate it, and we'll see you next time.